from the dead.
The End of an Era and the Beginning. That's the title of the second episode of My Hero Academia's final season. Very fittingly, I want to jump straight to the end of the episode because Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite is finally back, and that entire ending scene has to be one of the most gorgeously animated MHA scenes ever. I already had very high expectations for this moment, and Studio Bones surely delivered. But before dissecting that scene fully, let's go back a bit. If you are new here, hi, I am Jam, and I've read the entire MHA manga, but don't worry, I won't spoil any of the future events. I am here to review the episodes just as they are, because even if I know the end of the story, I am still experiencing the anime adaptation for the first time just like all of you. With all of that said, let's begin. The second episode starts the same as the first one, with the imagery of cherry blossoms. But unlike the first episode, this time we go to the past, to see baby All Might and his mom. That was a simply beautiful and idyllic scene. Even with so little, you could feel the warmth of that memory through the screen. Even All Might himself says that those are such tender memories to call an origin. The concept of origin is something that's brought up quite often in this story. But what's unique about All Might is that this is actually the second time we are getting something like this. Back in Season 3, as he was fighting All for One, he also thought back to his origins, but back then he mostly thought about Nana and One for All. But this time, by going to the actual beginning, the story is creating a sense that this is truly the end, which, obviously, fits to the whole theme of the episode. In general, when it comes to the execution of themes, I feel like the writing of this episode was some of the most impressive in the entire MHA story. I also love how that first scene, where All Might is reading a comic about a hero, parallels what we know about All for One and his brother, how they also used to read comics as children and got inspired by them. Next, the beautiful imagery of this episode continues as we see All Might looking back at the path he'd walked so far. I love how the lighting changes from a bright sunny day to a sunset and then to a starry night. While I absolutely love the manga art style, I feel like this is one of a few moments where the scene works way better in color. The atmosphere really pulls you in and you get this sense of the passage of time. Finally, I love the idea to portray All Might's past as these precious, warm and bright lights. That same imagery is brought back at the end of the episode, where we get to see what those lights represent, but more on that later. After the opening, we jump back to the action. While Stain got turned into a stain pretty quickly, even that short scene gave us so much to talk about. Structurally, this fits so well for Stain's character in general. If you really think about it, he had extremely little screen time, but the impact he had on the story was impossible to forget. The whole League of Villains, as we know it, assembled because of Stain. The ideas about heroism that he brought up in Season 2 continued being discussed throughout the entire story by other characters. And finally, given that Stain saw All Might as the only true hero, it made sense for him to sacrifice himself so that All Might can live on and continue fighting. I feel like there's one detail that often gets overlooked, and that's Stain observing Ida. Stain's whole ideology in Season 2 was that people don't change. If you are not worthy to call yourself a hero, you should just die. But MHA showed us over and over again that people do change, that there's always hope as long as you're alive. So in this scene, we saw Stain witness how his worldview is proven wrong. so it fits that with the death of a character's ideology also comes the death of the actual character. One last brilliant detail I want to talk about in this scene is All For One calling Stain a murderer. Right before that, All For One actually acknowledges the impact that Stain had on society. But now, none of that is relevant anymore. Now, Stain will be remembered as nothing more than a murderer. And while the audience sees the hypocrisy in All For One's words, All For One himself, in his mind, sees himself like a god. In his own words, a demon lord, and not just a regular killer. Next, we get a hallucination that All Might sees. He imagines Nana telling him to keep fighting, and he also imagines Night Eye looking down at him in sadness, because this whole situation is exactly what Night Eye warned All Might about. The part about Nana parallels Season 3. Back then, All Might was also fighting All For One, losing, but drew strength from the memory of Nana. I also love the repetition of concepts. Nana says that the tale's still being told, and before that, Stain also said that everything is a process. Once again, these lines tie into the greater themes of this whole episode. I also love that All Might imagines Night Eye as sad and almost disappointed, because we are always much harsher on ourselves than other people are. All Might says that physically he can't fight anymore, but then he remembers what Midoriya's mom and also Deku himself told him. In other words, even by the midpoint of the episode, he hears someone else telling him to live on 4 separate times, from Stain, from Hercules, from Inko, and from Deku. So, he starts crawling towards All For One as he says, "I am not dead yet." I think the anime did a fantastic job with All Might's facial expressions this episode, and personally, I think that the white eyes look better in the anime compared to the manga. But I still want to show you this specific panel from the manga. While the anime did a good job, the angle and the shading of the manga can't be beaten. And since I already mentioned the white eyes, I think it's interesting to try thinking, why are they turning white now in this fight? I believe that shaded eyes symbolized just how tired All Might was. His eyes had literally lost their spark from the heavy burden that All Might was carrying for most of his life. And yet here, quite paradoxically, when he's so close to death, All Might looks more alive than ever. The memories of his childhood and his entire life made him remember his origin, his reason for doing what he's doing. So finally, that spark is back as his eyes turn white again, as he can look at his accomplishments clearly. Next, we see All For One try and fail using the sludge warp quirk on Shigaraki. I loved this part in the manga, but I feel like it ended up being the most forgettable part of the episode. Once again, it's fully because of the exceptional art style of the manga. Also, Shigaraki swallowing the quirk was portrayed almost as a comedic moment in the manga, but the anime heavily toned it down. I actually understand that decision to keep the tone of the episode more consistent, even if, personally, a part of me wanted to see that ridiculous moment animated. The remaining half of the episode is perfect. I literally don't have a single bad thing I can say about it. I refuse to believe that there was a single dry eye as people watched this sequence of events unfold. We see the heartbreaking side of All For One carrying All Might so that he can kill him in front of the audience. Most importantly, Deku. The anime portrayed his emotions and how torn he is so perfectly. Deku's entire thing was always about saving people, but in this moment, saving people means winning against Shigaraki, so he literally can't go and save All Might, one of the most important people in his life. I absolutely loved one subtle change that the anime made. In the manga, it looked like Deku actually called out All Might's name, but in the anime, it was changed to a quiet cry, his voice high and cracking, and that, combined with the somber music, made that scene incredibly heartbreaking. Then we see All Might trying to use the last card he has. In my review of the last episode, I avoided mentioning it because I didn't want to spoil anything by dropping any hints, but if you paid attention, in the first episode we actually saw All Might use powers named after 19 of his students. We saw literally everyone except Bakugo, because that was All Might's final card, trying to blow himself up alongside All for One. It's what Bakugo himself did last season, when he sacrificed himself, but his explosions had never shone brighter than they did in that moment. Once again, the visuals and the editing of this scene were beautiful. All Might's inner monologue as he thinks about Deku, his facial expressions, the flashback to Nana, where she said that All Might will win because he is even crazier than All for One, and also the dissonance between the absolutely unhinged face of All Might as he is about to violently blow himself up to kill All for One, while he talks about his dream of becoming a symbol of peace. Unfortunately, but also luckily, All for One stops All Might here. The episode gets a bit chaotic from that point. I love that All for One was enjoying tormenting All Might so much that he was smiling hard enough to tear his own cheeks. I also loved how Gentle Criminal, or should I say Gentle Hero, was fully prepared to go and fight All for One, and what's even better is that All for One saw him as enough of a threat to take him out of the fight before he could even get close. All for One also removed other distractions, like the jets. At this point, it felt like there was truly no hope. We saw flashes to the people all around the world watching as All for One prepared to rip All Might in half, and it really gave us the sense of just how important All Might is to the world, how big of an impact he had on people, both the ones who were close to him and also complete strangers. I loved Deku desperately reaching a hand towards him, even if he knew he couldn't really do anything. That image of trying to reach your hand out is one of the most iconic images throughout the entire story that was present from the very beginning and that's still just as relevant here, at the end. Then we see Tsukauchi praying, begging someone, anyone, to save All Might, and his prayers are answered. Who could have thought that a day would come when a violent explosion is the biggest sign of hope, a signal that calms everyone down and says that everything will be okay. We got a movie-quality animation for that last scene. Bakugo literally looked like an angel that came down to Earth to save the day, with light shining behind him and the divine choir singing in the back. The visual of All Might's path is brought back here, and we see that his biggest legacy, that those bright lights are the next generation, the people he inspired, the people he changed, most importantly, Deku and Bakugo. We see those lights transform and travel like a comet to the All Might card that Bakugo is still holding, that he must have picked up immediately after waking up. We see the words, the end of an era and the beginning, because that's exactly what the scene symbolizes. This is a passing of the torch. All Might's fight is over, but the fight of Deku and Bakugo begins. All Might passed his light on to them, so now it's their job to carry that light. The last two shots of both Bakugo and Deku, as they look at each other, are insanely gorgeous. I know I used that word a million times already, but it's still too weak to describe the beauty of that scene. You have no idea how excited I am for the next episode. I don't want to set anyone's expectations too high, but the next episode will bring to life one of my favorite moments in the entire MHA story. I am scared to think how much I will probably talk in the next week's video. Before I finish this video, I want to talk about the ending that we got to see for the first time in this episode. The concept is as perfect as it could be. From the beginning, Deku was always narrating this story, so for the last ending of the series, we get a recap of the most important moments in his life, all told through the beautifully reanimated scenes that, as it turns out, are drawings in one of Deku's iconic notebooks. This is a perfect way to end the series. But that's all for my thoughts this week. Please share your own thoughts in the comments, and if you're interested, you can subscribe and I'll see you next week as I review episode 3.